So, record, close that. Unity bundles up if any of you Unity developers are looking for assets. Looked at some of the reviews earlier and it seemed pretty good. Alrighty. Couple of things before we get going. So we have our homework is due tomorrow night. I had more people drop by office hours today than I think I ever had, so hopefully that was helpful for you. Couple of things with that. So I moved the calendar entry to the very top of course information just to see if that would be more helpful for all of you. But you can see GitLab Part 2 is due tomorrow night. I also added a reminder every Sunday night for the meeting minutes deadline. I don't know if you can pull this into your personal calendars or not. Oh, you can. You can do a external calendar link, so apparently you can do iCal into your whatever calendaring software you have. But this is just your reminder for pushing your Git commits weekly for your minutes. And obviously, since we didn't have the formal repo setup due until tomorrow night, just hold on to this one and make sure that it's in there. But hopefully everybody is on board with the homework tomorrow. Don't forget you have that proposal as part of it, so I'll be checking everybody's repo for that. I'm trying to think of what else we got going on. I think that's about it. So, unless there are any questions, we can get right into it. Present. All right, so we ended here last time when we were talking about the requirements process, what good and bad requirements are, things of that nature. So just defining them, basically, right? And we started talking about management, so that's where we track our requirements, we manage them, we allow revisions, things of that nature. And this is going to kind of slide right into what we're talking about today with how do we even figure out how do we even get our requirements from our customers and things of that nature. One thing I want to check, so I did this earlier, and I was glad to see that pretty much everybody was managing okay. I like to make sure that all of you are doing okay at home, since obviously I can't really see you in this format, but go ahead, go to Slido. This is your ID, or use the QR code, but I just want to make sure everybody's doing okay. And if you are struggling, please either contact me or somebody that you're happy to talk to about that kind of issue, but I'm more than happy to chat if anybody's having issues. All right, pretty rough. Uh-oh. Obviously, this is not ideal for anybody right now, but hopefully we'll get through the semester and everything will end up okay at the end. Not a fan. Yeah, I'm not a fan of this year either. All right, so we got 10 in. If you need to get happy, listen to some NSP. They've got very happy songs. Their covers are happy. Their comedy songs are more sexual. Just fun. Probably should not stream those, though. Be a little awkward. All right. I love this, I don't know, side note for presenting. I like having a slide, and then I can just see live results going all over the place. That's kind of fun. Think of it a free version of iClicker, I guess, except I don't really track these. All right. Well, again, if you are having a rough semester, please reach out if you are. So let's talk about the actual material so that we can get through what we need to today. Just to kind of review a little bit, I'm curious if you can dump this into the chat. What do you think the difference between a functional and a non-functional requirement are? What makes one functional versus non-functional? Pardon me, why? Get rid of this silly little chair thing that's moving all over the place. Functional, what it do. Non-functional, how it do. Hey, I like that answer. Nice. Yeah. So functional, again, are very strict. Functional are quantitative, yeah. And non-functional would be the qualitative, right? So both explanations absolutely work. Functional are very good guidelines to tell your programmers the particular feature that you need to implement. Non-functionals then are going to get you maybe how they should look or how they should perform. The ilities, right? So that's our non-functional basis. Other thing, why do we need them at all? And this might seem like a leading question. Sorry, I'm clipping here. Let me fix that a little bit. Why do we need them at all? And I asked this question earlier and I got a couple of, are you really asking that? But there's actually a wide range of reasons why we have them. So the project doesn't go off the rails with random additions. Yep, so that helps us scope, right? Absolutely. Definitely a good start. The obvious answer is it tells our programmers and our team what to do, right? How the project should be structured, what the components and features are. It helps us scope. It'll give us constraints. Basically, it's everything that we need for the project. And again, this is going to be, I mentioned this last time, this is probably one of the most important parts of the project is nailing all these requirements down. So let's talk about the development process a little bit. I mentioned there is a process for requirements, right? We have a handful of steps here to go through. So we have the elicitation phase, which we're going to talk mostly about today. This is where we are actually collecting our user requirements. So we are going to our customer or to our clients or to our users or to our team, and we're figuring out exactly what requirements we're going to need. All right, so we're going to elicit them is what it's called. Then we'll go through an analysis phase where we look at everything we've collected and we're going to analyze them formally, right? So do these requirements make sense? Easy question. But do we have a good set of constraints? Are they very clear in what we're looking at here, right? Are there requirements? Are there any duplicates? All of the problems that we talked about with the requirements last time, when we start analyzing them, we're basically looking for kind of the high-level problems. We might even start doing some models as well if we're going down the UML route. So let's figure things out here. Then we get into our specification and our validation side. This is where we actually start documenting things, where we start formalizing our requirement specification. And then validation, something we'll talk about a little bit later in our requirements module here. Do these requirements actually specify what we think they specify? Right, so we're going to do a very deep dive into them. We're going to sit down and try to formally verify that we're happy with them. And then that dumps out into our software requirement spec. So then this document becomes our holy grail, our Bible for the project, right? It's our technical guidance for everything. Depending on your software process, this spec may be more flexible than not, right? In the waterfall style, or the more, I guess, procedural style, this is set in stone at the very beginning. But if you go agile, this document becomes flexible and we can update it as we go. It will still exist in some fashion. Now we have some other arrows in this figure as well, which are important to talk about. And this is kind of where last time when we mentioned that if there's a problem in requirements, it's easier to fix them while you're in the requirements phase, which intuitively makes sense because you're working on them. But these lines and these arrows here, these are actually telling you how you can go back. So let's say we're eliciting our requirements and we're developing everything here. If we have a problem with what the customer or the user told us, we might figure this out during the analysis phase, and then we can go back to them and clarify. All right, so drop an email, ask the customer, give them a phone call, whatever it's going to be. We can get quick feedback here. If you did this later on, it'd be, again, we'd have to go through the whole software design process again. So we have a way back here. When we go through validation, we may realize that some of our requirements are bad or faulty or unclear. We can reevaluate them. Maybe we can recontextualize them or rewrite them or something. And if there's still a problem, then we can go back to the customer and have them clarify. Right? We can also maybe find missing requirements or duplicate requirements, and we can go back to that elicitation phase or to the analysis phase. Or we can rewrite them. So let's say that a requirement was poorly written. After we've laid it down in the specification phase, we go to validate, which is basically like testing a natural language requirement. So it's going to be more human-centric, I suppose, rather than automating. But if we wrote something poorly, we can rewrite it. Once we are in that software requirements spec, it becomes a formal living document, right? But until we're at that step, we still have a lot more flexibility in this process. And then at the very end here, I didn't animate this in, but we want to make sure that whatever spec we create matches what our user wants, right? So if we have a software requirements spec, we've gone through this entire process. Maybe we've looped back a few times, loop back, keep going through. We end up with our document. Well, if it doesn't match what we wanted here, then there's a problem somewhere, and you have to go back and fix things. The key is that it is, again, a process that we have to follow. And basically all the steps are necessary to make sure that you have effectively a project specification that makes sense. All right, so thus far we've been talking about the actual requirements, but not the people behind them. And the person who typically will handle the requirements side is going to be your analyst. Now, the figure that I've got, I keep doing this like I'm doing a whiteboard or something, but I need to do this. This figure is for a business analyst, but the general idea is the same for a software analyst or any kind of an analyst. Basically, this is a role that you will fill. Depending on your team size, depending on your business infrastructure, your project makeup, you could be an analyst and a developer, or you could be an analyst and a project manager. It just depends who can fill this role. It is not necessarily a job title, but it can be. Now, this individual's job is at a high level to figure out what the requirement spec is going to be, but what that means is that you have to have interpersonal skills. You have to be able to talk to people, you have to be able to understand what they're telling you, which that's both sides, right? You can ask questions, but then you also have to understand what they're telling you back. Communication. This is one of those important things we keep harping on you as CS, computer engineers, software engineers, whatever your role, whatever your degree path is. This is where we start seeing how it actually plays out. Okay, so we're going to talk to the project stakeholders. And again, stakeholders are anybody with an interest in the project. This could be your developer, your customer, your user, your project manager, your company owner, anybody who is tied to this project in some way will be a stakeholder. The analyst's job is to figure out exactly what every stakeholder needs from this project. So it might not be just external. You may also have to deal with internal pressures. Right. And then the other side, you're the communication bridge between the customer and the developers. So you are translating their needs to the developer. I hope by now, I realize this movie is the late 90s or early 2000s, but recommend seeing Office Space. There's the guy who had to take the specification from the customer to the developer, and that was his only job. Basically an analyst, right? I'm talking to the customers. That's an analyst job. So things that we care about for the analyst. If you look through this list, you see listening skills, interviewing, questioning, observation, writing. These are all of these soft skills which we hope will get burned into you by the end of your time at Grand Valley, right? So being able to communicate, being able to write what you've done, these are all the things that a human resources person is looking for. Side topic, but we assume that you're going to know how to program by the time you're done, right? You are learning how to learn, so you're learning how to pick up any language super quickly or a new framework really quickly, right? Assuming you're technically gifted or oriented at least, which you probably are here in the CS program or IT or again, whichever track. These are the things which are really important to pick up. And that's why we always have team-based term projects in school, right? If you can't tell somebody else what you did, then you kind of live in a vacuum. But if you can communicate, I developed this project, it does this, this, and this, then, you can at least share technical knowledge with other people. And interviews oftentimes are going to be focusing on these kinds of things. Like they're looking to see would you fit in a team environment or not. So a side ending, but make sure that you work on these skills if you are not socially oriented. Um, I keep mentioning this, and it seems kind of strange being the faculty on camera or in the classroom. I am an introvert by trade and by nature, and public speaking is not my favorite thing in the world, but I enjoy teaching, so I've got a little push and pull here. So make sure that you work on these. But back to what the analyst does. Listening skills. Let's say that you have a meeting with a client or a user or a customer, or, whoever you're talking to. You need to be able to ask them questions about this project and what they want, and then also understand what they're telling you. And more than that, you need to be able to try and hone in on what they actually want to and what you can provide. So if they start talking about developing a user interface and they want this, 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 and this, maybe they want responsive because that's a buzzword if it's a web application or something like that, right? And then you have to be able to dig into that a little bit more. Well, do you actually know what that means? Is that something that you specifically want? So be able to kind of dig into what what they're looking for, and that ties in with interviewing and questioning. You have to be able to analyze everything that you get out of your people that you're basically talking to. So figure out what they actually want, analyze the requirements that are laid down. Back and forth kind of goes in with the name analyst. You have to be able to analyze, right? But then these other skills here, you have to be good at observing. So observing people, observing their behaviors, observing how they do their job, because you can take that and translate it into requirements later on. And then other things, writing skills, your technical writing chops should be pretty good for this role. So if I know that you're probably mostly sophomores and above, maybe you haven't had a whole lot of exposure to technical writing, but generally that means that every word in a sentence has a place. Like you don't have any fluffy text like you might get in a fiction type of paper or anything like that, right? So all of your interpersonal and communication skills have to be on point, is kind of the takeaway here. And if that role sounds perfect for you, bam, there's your career path right there. Um, and if not, odds are at some point you'll probably be helping analyze requirements. So get used to the communication side of things. Again, working in engineering and software development, only a little chunk of it's actually programming. I shouldn't have animated this one, but now we're getting into the first box of the development process. So this is the elicitation. This is where we are trying to elicit requirements from our stakeholders. And what that means is to communicate with them in some fashion, get their requirements out of those users and put them down to paper. All right, so this first bullet here, it's the most communication intensive aspect. We're doing a lot of talking to people here. We do have different strategies for this though. We might have workshops, we might do interviews, we might do questionnaires, we might observe them in their natural habitat. We have a lot of different ways to get requirements. And I will say that there is not one technique which is going to get you everything that you need. You are probably going to have to do a combination of these things. All right, so let's start with group workshops here. You get all your stakeholders into a room, whether it's physical, assuming that the world doesn't end next year, or you get into like a Zoom meeting or a Skype meeting or something like that, right? So we're going to have a place where people can talk about their project needs. You are probably going to record it in some fashion, and you're going to figure out what all of the requirements are based on how people are talking. In a workshop, it's going to have to be pretty structured. You only have a certain amount of time to talk. Here are the points that you need to cover during your time. Um, be ready to cut people off if they start blathering on, because everybody likes to talk about what they need and, make sure that their priorities come first, right? So be aware that structuring group interactions is kind of important. So we have this format. We also have interviews. So this is where, you either interview one or handful of people, depends how you want to structure things, but you start asking them questions, right? You conduct a legitimate interview. What kind of project do you want us to develop? What are the features that we need? What color do you want this widget? What size does this have to be? What kind of user experience do you want to have? So with these types of questions, you have to get kind of proficient at asking their correct types of questions, right? So closed questions and open questions. Holy crap, this is going wild. Look at all of these GitHub updates. Sorry, I'm going to mute my audio here. All right. But if you ask a close-ended question, this means that you're asking something very, very specific, right? What unit of measurements are we creating for, assuming we're doing a digital ruler, maybe is it centimeters, inches? What unit of measure do you want? Very closed question, right? There's no wiggle room. Whereas if you ask an open-ended question, like how many buttons do you want to see on the page at any given time? That's still kind of closed question. What kind of a user experience are you looking for? Basically, both of these types of questions have a purpose, but with open-ended, people can kind of expand on what they're looking for, right? They can ramble on about their desires for various features and whatnot, and you might be able to get a lot better of an idea of what their actual requirements are, including, some of the more quality-driven requirements, like your non-functionals, right? Whereas if you ask a very closed-ended question, you'll get the answer, and that's it. They both have a purpose. Structured and unstructured, this is another, I talked about this a little bit already. Structure, basically, you're giving a very specific format and guideline to follow, whereas unstructured is kind of more of a free-for-all, whether it's a workshop or an interview. Again, they both have a purpose. It just depends on what kind of information you're looking for. If it's unstructured, maybe this is like an initial project kickoff where everybody's going to be talking and you're just going to go with the flow and ask questions, versus something more structured where you need very, very specific information as we go. Next type of interview. This is the message in a bottle style, as I kind of have seen it called, or also like to call it. We can do surveys or questionnaires where you would write a survey or write a questionnaire, and then you would send it out to a whole bunch of people. And the thing with this, and why I call it message in a bottle, is that you're not always guaranteed to get a response. Whereas interviewing and workshops, you're going to have the people there, you can hold them accountable. Surveys and questionnaires, the only way you're going to get a response is if you give an incentive, if their manager tells them they have to do it, or you might even get some people who are bored and do it out of the goodness of their heart, right? But with surveys and questionnaires and things like that, you still have to be very good at writing questions very specifically. There is a whole art to writing surveys, of getting exactly the information that you want out of it. And that almost goes into the realm of cognitive science or the communication studies types of degrees. So just be aware that everything we've talked about so far, closed versus open-ended, this applies to survey questions too. If I gave you all a question that said, what's your opinion of the class so far? I'll probably get a million different answers, and I don't know that I'll be able to draw any conclusions out of that. But if I give you very specific questions where you have, very specific answer sets you can give, even if there is room to expand, I can get a better feel for what's going on. Right? Same thing applies to projects. We also have ethnography or observation. So this is an interesting one where we actually observe the users in their natural habitat. right? So let's pretend we're creating a point of sale system, or we're creating a medical device where we don't necessarily go and interview people, but we might try to be a fly on the wall, right? Let's watch how people do their day-to-day business. Ethnography, this is the study of people and their cultures, and culture can be like your work environment, your work culture. It's not necessarily related to your personal culture, for instance, but it is basically one way of getting requirements. Anybody have an idea? So let me ask you all a question. If I'm going to get my requirements by observation, so let's say I'm going to go to Big B, right? I'm going to go to work for Big B. They need a new system for automatically dispensing coffee. If I go to a Big B and I observe how the day-to-day goes, what are some of the limitations of that? And while you're all feverishly writing response into the chat, this is not a bad way to do it. It's just a different way, and there are some considerations you have to make. So what might some of the issues you have to deal with an observation type approach be? Should have made this one a slidey. Might not get all the scenarios people want. Absolutely. So you're only getting the slice of life that you're seeing, right? So you might not get all scenarios. You might not get a accurate picture of day-to-day life, right? So if I go in at the low time, I'm gonna have no idea what rush hour looks like. You know, when students get out of class and they all rush to the coffee shop to refuel for the next class. Yeah. Sample size is limited, so if you went on a different day, it would be different. Yep, absolutely. Absolutely right. These kinds of things are good to see how people interact, right? Um, however, you have to be sure that you get an accurate picture. So yeah, your sample size is limited. The other side, right? If I am there, you know, let's say that we're actually in the classroom and you're all working diligently on an in-class assignment. You may behave differently in class if I'm looking over your shoulder versus, you know, on stream here where I would have you all go to a Discord room or something like that, right? Or, you know, if I have you do some group assignment without me hovering over your shoulder, you'll probably be a little bit more relaxed rather than trying to get it done while mean old man's looking at you try to get things done, right? So behaviors may change too. They might try to look their best to you, the contractor, the client, or you know whatever they think you are, the person overseeing the day. So make sure that you're aware of that and that you try to be as inobtrusive as possible. All right, last couple of things. So we might also have an idea of the different scenarios that may occur, right? Different use cases, um, different features that have to be implemented. We might be able to do an analysis of all of these different contexts, right? Of how somebody will be using an application. So we can analyze that and try to come up with requirements. We can look at bug reports, problem reports, maybe feature requests. Depending on your config management tool, you might be doing something like looking at pull requests or project notes, project entries. Basically, we're looking at various documentations here. Great. So what hopefully you're getting out of this slide, and this thing is super dense, by the way, if you're looking at this and wondering why it seems so basic, there's a lot going on here. You're going to get a different amount of information for each type of task you do here, right? So if you do an interview, you can get a lot of very, very fine-grained detail, but your sample size is going to be one, right? One person you're talking to. You're not getting everybody who might be attached to the project. You might not be getting all user groups, right? So you're going to get that person with their technical proficiency. Maybe not the upper level manager who doesn't know how to open Excel or something like that. That's a stereotype, upper level management, obviously. I'm sure they're all great at Excel. But you have that. Whereas observation, you're getting a very broad look, but you might not be getting any details. So you could have an idea of how people would use the thing on a day-to-day basis, but you might not have a very detailed picture of their needs with this actual system. And keep in mind, this will apply to any project, not just, like user-centric things. If you have an embedded system, that's still going to have a lot of these features that we need to deal with. There might not be a user directly, beep, bap, bap, boop, boop, boop into, a touchpad, but they're still going to be interacting with it in some way. So once we get through that phase of the elicitation process, then we have to classify them. So we have a metric ton of information, and I left off the curse word that I wanted to throw in there for your benefit. We have to classify them, right? So this is all going to be unstructured. It's going to be in your notes. Hopefully you're good at organizing your note-taking skills. But then we're going to try to figure out which bit of information goes where. Is this thing a functional requirement, right? Is it something very quantitative? Or is it a little more high level and it's like a business rule where it actually impacts the business, but not the implementation? Is it a non-functional attribute or is non-functional requirement where it's performance related, but we can still measure it? Right? Is it referencing something that we would have to reach out to another interface? Do we have to make our system plug and play with an API or with an existing system? Do we have any interface considerations that we have to deal with? And if so, do we have to start talking about what data is going to be looking like going back and forth? I'm going to skip constraints. I'll come back to that. We might have data definitions kind of going with that interface. What are our data types going to be that we have to handle, right? It's going to be database driven. It's going to be a stream of data. Is it going, to something cloud-based? So meters, ints. So like what is our data that we have that is being kind of slung around this project? We might have some early ideas of solutions, right? So at the requirements level, again, we're not putting implementation details in. Like we're not saying go out and use Node.js, go out and download Angular and get that. But we might say use a JavaScript or not even a Java, use a framework that is server side because we need server side considerations. Or develop towards these safety critical standards, which means that you're probably going to be using C, but you have the framework for where the developers should go. These kinds of ideas, we're going to introduce constraints. Now, constraints are important because they will kind of box in our project to where it needs to be, right? So you cannot have data that exceeds a particular boundary, or the system can only be used in such and such a situation, or during this particular time of day. Maybe you have constraints on who is allowed to access the application, right? Roles and security privileges and things of that nature. There might be safety constraints, right? So our autonomous car can't crash into the wall. Let's say that we have something that's broadcasting a microwave signal or a radio signal. It can't be broadcasting in such a way that it causes cancer or something of that nature at such a frequency. So all of these constraints are going to, again, help to formalize what this project is going to look like. And constraints are usually a good thing that tells us what we can and cannot do. All right. So nobody got this last time, or at least they didn't want to chime in, but +1 karma to you if you picked that one. Or figure out who that's from. But one of the next important things is to figure out who our users are that will be using our project. And why is this so important? Well, it's very easy to develop a project that we think we would want to use. But unless if you're doing a project for fun, more than likely your users are going to be somebody with a completely different background from you. Technically, culturally, environmentally, it's probably going to be somebody else, right? So even though you love your system, Maybe it's horrible for the end user, or maybe it's great. Just depends on how good your user experience skills are. But bringing users in and getting their feedback, getting their requirements is a very, very important part of the process. And what does this mean? It means that at the analysis phase and the elicitation phase, we try to figure out who will be using the project. Now, this could be, somebody in upper level management's going to be using this. Maybe it's like a spreadsheeting or a forecasting software. So it has to be good for somebody with accounting skills or with, business knowledge. If you start going down that path, you're talking about doing things like data warehousing or generating reports or things of that nature. Your project and the interfaces, and when I say interface here, I mean like more of a user interface, it has to be very user friendly, right? Maybe it's going to do some some more checking of the fields to make sure that incorrect values are not entered. Excuse me. Whereas if you go for a project that's more technically proficient, you might not have to have as many safeguards, maybe less eye candy in there. Maybe it's going to be for somebody with a disability where it has to be accessible, right? You have color considerations, maybe limb limb issues to consider, or blindness or deafness. So any of these things can impact a user. Again, not everybody has your experience and your background. A good example is I've been playing around with my term project before I got into grading this morning. This is how I'm testing my project, right? I've got my terminal up. I've got various Vim files here. I've got my little Python script, but not everybody likes this. I love this look. You might want to do it in VS Code, or you might want to use Visual Studio or one of those lovely online IDEs, right? If you're developing a user interface for coding, this works great for me, but it might be horrible for you, right? I'm in Vim right now. I can guarantee that if you've never used Vim, you have no idea how to close this thing. That's kind of one of the running jokes. But, for me, this is great. But again, for others, it's not going to be great. So figuring out who's going to be using your project is super important. And what do we care about in terms of experience, and why am I harping on this so much? You might care about how often they use it, right? So if they're going to be using it every day, every hour of every day, you're going to want to make the experience very easy and friendly to use and minimize repetitive tasks, right? They might not have any experience with your application domain too. Think of people who are maybe not computer savvy, or if it's a medical grade application, however the receptionist has to use it, you might not be filling it full of medical terms, right? Which they might not know about. Or maybe they do. They're all well trained. But the thing to keep in mind is just that your application needs to be good for the person who's using it. Not to ramble on for too long with this. The original Tron, by the way. Great movie. Love it. The new Trons are pretty good too. The Daft Punk soundtrack was great. All right, and probably one of the last things we're going to talk about today are conflicts. So this is always going to happen, no matter how good your team is, how well you've gelled, how well you get on with everybody at the in your unit or your team or whatever your structure is. You're going to have a different outlook than other people will. And this first phrase here is very, very key. So different stakeholders have different sets of potentially conflicting requirements. Right, so if we do the workshop type of thing where we bring everybody into a room, the project manager is probably not going to care as much about the business requirements as the upper level, manager who's trying to sell this project to somebody who's got a lot of money to fund it, right? Their requirements are going to be different. Maybe somebody at a higher level is going to be interested in, well, it's got to be flashy, it's got to be usable, it has to be this wonderful piece of software that's going to solve everybody's problems. Whereas if you have the developer in the room, they're going to say, well, yeah, that's great, and we can do that. However, it's never going to technically function correctly because we have so many things going on behind the scenes. Or there's not even a touch screen. Why are we talking about flashiness, right? So the key thing here is that you may have conflicts, and dealing with them is going to be critical. So let's say that everybody's in the room, and you are the glue to this environment. You're holding everything together. People are at their throats. There's madness and chaos happening. Papers flying everywhere because this is obviously a business environment, and that's how things are done. Your job is to resolve this conflict. Now, how do we do that? One of the ways, other than verbal and communication skills, we can prioritize. So which requirements have a priority over the other ones? We can categorize them into three minimally. This is kind of a nice high-level categorization here. Which are essential? What requirements do you absolutely need to have in place for the project to be a success? Okay, obviously there's quality, safety constraints, usability, all of that fun stuff, which actually makes your project useful for the user. Essential, absolutely. Then we can start talking about them in terms of what's desirable and what's not desirable. So maybe performance and responsiveness and things of that nature, they're desirable, but we can live without them for now, right? So let's make it a stretch goal. Let's put it on the back burner, make it for the next sprint, however you want to categorize it, right? But we have to get the essential ones done first. We can also make them optional. So that is a great requirement. However, we can eliminate it for this particular project version, right? It's nice, it's a good idea, but it's not critical to its success. So 3 categories. You can break this down into more if you prefer. Essentially, you're prioritizing, you're ranking things. What's going to get into the requirement spec, what's not? Because these are the things that your team has to work on. All right, let me ask you now. What are some good examples of conflicts? I've got another slide for you here. I'm just kind of curious if you can come up with any kinds of conflicting requirements. I've given you the cynical view of the different perspective conflicts, right? The person selling the project versus the person implementing the project. What do you think we have? Do it fast and perfect. Nice, I like that one. So there's your conflict right there. Get it done quickly and perfectly. If we go back to that agile triangle, there is quality on one end, and then there's, what are the other two? Features and something. It's been, yeah. Sacrifice quality at the expense of speed. What else do we have? People still paying attention. Handle a huge amount of data quickly. Okay, well, let's take that for use the buzzword. So let's just throw it into an Elasticsearch engine, and that's all we need, right? What's the Elasticsearch? It's got a snazzy name. I was using that for a while too. Oh, I wasn't using it. I had a colleague using it, and he got me into it. Elasticsearch. What is it? It had a cute name. Make it state-of-the-art but simple. Absolutely. And shoot. Maybe it was the interface that I was using. Sorry, I'm going off topic now. Spec search interface. Cabana, that's right, that's what it is. Separate topic, and went down the Elasticsearch route. Yeah, so definitely some good examples here. Could even be, as simple as feature interactions, right? So let's maybe think of this in terms of a vehicle where you have a bunch of different modules on your car, right? So you have like a window module, a radio module, the engine controller module. They're all talking on one, it's called a bus or a network. I'm sure it's gone beyond now. It probably hasn't. But everybody thinks they have priority to talk on this network. But if everybody starts talking at the same time, then we're going to start getting packet conflicts and things are going to go wonky. So if my module has to be very chatty and your module has to be very chatty, there's going to be a conflict there. Secure but super accessible. Oh, this is a good one. Everything should be highly secure, but easy for the users to get into. That's definitely a good one. Use a lot of technology, but not have it go out of date when new technology comes out. Hey, this is the manager buzzword. Absolutely. Let's use the latest and greatest thing up until a new JavaScript framework gets developed. I like it. All right, so good examples, definitely. Oops, I went the wrong way. Sorry about that. Why is this black now? Okay, good stuff. All right, I will leave you off here. Last thing we have to talk about are champions. So this is part of the elicitation process. Generally, you're going to identify a person who will represent the user interest if you don't have the customer there. This person will be separate from the analyst, separate from the developers. Generally, they will probably be somebody at the higher level management level where they are going to be helping you make decisions on requirements. All right, so they're going to have the user interest in mind. More often than not, it's going to be internal internal views in mind over the customer, but hopefully they can separate that out. But the key thing to keep in mind is that this type of person is important to have because they can help you, filter out what's a priority, what's not a priority, right? They can filter out these optional requirements versus desirable versus essential. So you're gonna have somebody else on your team giving you, again, hopefully the customer viewpoint. And this person will have their name all over the project, and if it's a success, their name will go up in gold on the wall, and if it goes down in flames, they're also going to be the one responsible. So other than that, we're pretty much at the end here before we go too deeply into more. Does anybody have any questions on what we talked about today in terms of basically requirements elicitation? Or any questions on the homework or anything like that? I know I asked you at the beginning, but figure I'll make sure that everybody caught it if you joined late. Because if not, we will pick back up on Friday. Homework due tomorrow, and 10 out of 50 means nothing. Yeah, so sorry about that. When I was grading your in-class assignments, I was on the wrong column. So that should be updated now. If not, yeah, don't worry about the 10 out of 150. It's not due till tomorrow. That one was my bad. If you have not started yet, please do so before tomorrow. Otherwise, you're going to have a bad time because some of it is Git related, some of it is project related. So other than that, I will see you tomorrow. Wednesday. Some more of that sweet outro music going. And yeah, other than that, enjoy our lovely rainy day, and I will see you all next time. Bye, everybody.